You're watching a Highwire Media podcast. Today I'm going to be telling you about the case of Jodi Huisentruit, which has pretty much become a cold case at this point. However, they are really trying to ramp up awareness about this case, and there isn't much content about it on YouTube. This is an older case. Jodi went missing in the 90s. This case takes place in Minnesota. Jodi Huisentruit was born on June 5th, 1968, and raised in Long Prairie, Minnesota. Growing up, she was really active and popular. She had a pretty normal upbringing. In high school, she really liked golf. She was actually on the golf team and won the state Class A tournament in both 1985 and 1986. As I said, Jodi was really popular. She had a lot of friends and built strong relationships over the years. Many of those friends are still looking for her and fighting for her to this day. They said that Jodi was a big dreamer, and her biggest dream was to be famous. After she graduated high school, she went to St. Cloud State University, where she studied mass communications and speech communication. During her time in college, she joined the school's TV news network and played a big role in it. She really enjoyed it. She was good at it. People on campus enjoyed watching her, and it really confirmed her love for journalism and being on the news. She knew that she wanted to eventually have her spot on a national news television network. Jodi graduated from St. Cloud in 1990. After graduation, she began working for an airline, but quickly returned to journalism. She started her broadcasting career with KGAN in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. After working in Cedar Rapids, Jodi returned to Minnesota for a job at KSAX in Alexandria. But shortly after that, she returned to Iowa for another position at KIMT in Mason City, Iowa. Jodi landed another job for the morning and afternoon shows. She was very happy, and the producers were really excited to have her. At first, they were a bit nervous that her Minnesota accent was a little too strong. They even talked about trying to give her speech therapy to help her lose the accent, especially since she wanted to go into national news one day. But people in Minnesota really liked hearing that accent. People described her as like a morning cup of joe, a ray of sunshine that everyone needed to start their day. She was on the 6 a.m. newscast, and a lot of people literally started their day with Jodi. It was June 27th, 1995. As I mentioned, Jodi was on the 6 a.m. newscast, which meant she had to be at work pretty early. They had to run through a few things, supposed to do hair and makeup, so Jodi usually arrived at the station around 3:30 a.m. Her producer at KIMT, Amy, would call Jodi if she wasn't there after 4 a.m. Sometimes there were mornings where Jodi had overslept or her alarm didn't go off, the normal accidents that happen. So Amy made sure she got there with enough time. That morning, Amy started calling Jodi. Jodi actually answered the phone and said she had overslept, but would be right there. She asked about the show, was concerned about it, and reassured Amy, "I'll be right there." They waited for her. By 5:30 a.m., Jodi still wasn't at the station, even though she was supposed to be on in 30 minutes. Amy called her apartment again, her landline, but there was no answer. By 6 a.m., Jodi still hadn't arrived. Amy had to step in for her and do her role on the show Daybreak. An hour later, at 7 a.m., there was still no sign of Jodi. The news station, of course, called the police and let them know that she didn't show up for work that day. Police went straight to Jodi's apartment, and when they arrived, they found her red Mazda Miata still in the parking lot. However, the scene around her car clearly pointed to some type of foul play. Her personal items were scattered all over the ground: her shoes, her hairdryer, and a bent key, which appeared to be her car key. It seemed like she was probably running late and had brought her hairdryer with her to get ready at work. Not only that, police also noticed drag marks near her car, indicating that Jodi might have been forcibly taken from the scene. Perhaps she had put the key into the ignition when someone grabbed her, causing the key to bend, or maybe she even tried to use it as a weapon. Either way, something clearly happened in that spot near her car. Police also found someone's palm print on her car. That same day, search dogs were brought to Jodi's apartment in the nearby Winnebago River, which was very close to where she lived. They searched the entire area, but unfortunately, they didn't find any solid clues. That night, the KIMT news team had to break the devastating news to their viewers that one of their own news anchors was missing. One of Jodi's co-workers later said, quote, "I don't know what it looked like to the viewer, but I just know inside it was a mess." Now, me personally, I can only imagine how incredibly difficult it would have to be to report on someone you know personally, treating it like just another news story when in reality, it's someone you care about, someone you work with. It must have been an incredibly awkward and heartbreaking situation rolled up in one. Police conducted a full search in the newsroom, but were unable to find anything useful to the investigation. Jodi's family and friends were devastated, along with the entire community. Fear was growing in Mason City. Someone was missing, not just a face in the crowd, but one of the most familiar faces in town. Many people, including Jodi's family and friends, worried that someone had taken advantage of her because of how kind and friendly she was. People also feared that maybe Jodi had a stalker. Now, eventually, it was actually discovered that just a few months before her disappearance, Jodi had actually reported being stalked. Back in October of 1994, Jodi had been out hiking on a trail when she noticed a creepy black truck following her closely. She felt uncomfortable enough to report it to the police. However, despite her making the report, the police were never able to figure out who the driver was. As police continued to investigate, they tried to piece together exactly what was happening in Jodi's life before she disappeared. A neighbor came forward reporting that they heard a scream on the morning Jodi went missing. However, they hadn't called the police at the time, so nothing could have been done. This is one of those cases that really highlights the importance of speaking up. If you hear something suspicious, say something. If you're wrong, that's okay, but you should always report it if you can. In addition to this, there were also reports of a creepy white van spotted at Jodi's apartment complex that morning. But aside from those details, there just wasn't much else. Police were struggling to get a full picture of Jodi's life leading up to her disappearance. There are a few suspects and possible scenarios in this case. The first person of interest is a man named John Van Cise. Jodi had a strange relationship with John. He was a lot older than her, 22 years older. But according to her, their relationship was strictly a friendship. John claimed that he viewed Jodi as a daughter, and that's what Jodi would tell anyone who questioned their relationship. She would say, "He's like a father to me. She was like my own child. I treated her like my own child. She was a friend." Jodi would often go water skiing on John's boat, and she even introduced him to her friend group. He was around a lot. Originally, they met at a bar, but strangely, they also happened to live in the same apartment complex. To me, that's actually pretty suspicious. I wonder if John actually knew that about Jodi before he randomly met her at the bar. I mean, sometimes stalkers will go as far as moving into a complex just to be near their target. Police later discovered that the day before Jodi went missing, she had played in a golf tournament. Afterward, she went to John's house because he had also participated in the tournament. According to John, they spent the evening watching a video from a surprise party he had thrown for her a couple of weeks earlier. John's behavior in interviews is odd to say the least. Police believe that Jodi had befriended John at a time when he was struggling. Going through a divorce, his life was kind of a mess and he didn't have a lot of friends. Not only that, but he had a court-ordered breathalyzer in his car due to a past drunk driving incident. Jodi's friends thought their relationship was weird, but since she seemed comfortable with it, they just accepted it. However, many of her friends got the feeling that John wanted more than friendship from Jodi, and he was interested in something she wasn't willing to give. They weren't on the same page. At one point, he even named his boat after her. Jodi's friends thought that was a huge red flag, possibly even an indication of obsession or stalking. But Jodi brushed it off, thinking it was kind of sweet and harmless. Some people theorized that at some point, John may have told Jodi that he wanted more than friendship, and when she rejected him, it triggered a violent reaction. One of John's coworkers, who was also friends with Jodi, later came forward and said that on the morning Jodi disappeared, she called John around 6 a.m. to confirm that they were going to work together. She said that he seemed completely normal, no different than any other day. She believed there was no possible way that John could have abducted Jodi, disposed of her body, and then gone about his morning as usual. But in 1995, John Van Cise actually passed the polygraph test. Of course, polygraphs aren't the most reliable, but it's something to consider. In November 1995, Jodi's family was feeling so desperate for answers that they traveled to California and met with 3 different psychics in hopes of gaining some insight. Unfortunately, none of them were able to provide any useful information. By May 4th, 1996, nearly a year after Jodi's disappearance, there were still no solid leads. Around 100 volunteers gathered to search an area of the county, marking anything that seemed suspicious with little flags. Each flag site was later examined by law enforcement, but no promising evidence was ever recovered. Then 2 years later, another person of interest emerged. On January 26, 1998, an investigative reporter at WCCO-TV in Minneapolis, named Carolyn Lowe, was covering a crime spree in the area. She reported on a man named Tony Jackson, who had been accused of sexually assaulting 4 women over the course of 18 days. As she dug into his history, she started to wonder, Could he have something to do with Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance? Tony had a history of stalking his victims before assaulting them. Investigators discovered that at the time of Jodi's disappearance, Tony had been living in Mason City, Iowa, just 2 blocks away from her TV station. Tony was a former college basketball star, but he had a tendency to snap and become violent. Eventually, he was kicked out of college and later enrolled at North Iowa Community College in Mason City. During this time, he developed an interest in broadcasting and spent a lot of time watching the news, analyzing reporters. Many people theorized that he may have seen Jodi on the news, fixated on her, and memorized her schedule. It wouldn't have been difficult for anyone to figure out Jodi's schedule. It was the same every day. She was live on air at 6 a.m., which meant she would arrive at the station in the early morning hours. Adding to suspicions, 5 days before Jodi vanished, Tony had gone through a bad breakup with his girlfriend. He became angry and violent. Many people believe this could have triggered him to act out. Not only that, but his ex-girlfriend and Jodi looked very similar. Tony and his girlfriend briefly tried to reconcile, but at some point he choked her. He was arrested for domestic violence, but since his girlfriend refused to proceed with the charges, he was released. A few months later, he left Iowa and moved to Minnesota. That's where he committed 4 assaults before eventually getting arrested again in 1997. When police pulled him over, they found rope and duct tape in his car, more signs that he was a predator. While in prison, Tony allegedly confessed to another inmate that he had abducted and killed a news anchor. The inmate even claimed that Tony had written a rap song about burying a woman near a farm silo in a town called Tiffin, Iowa. Tiffin is just a few hours away from Mason City. Law enforcement even took this claim seriously enough and traveled to Tiffin. There was in fact a silo matching the description in Tony's rap lyrics. Cadaver dogs were brought to the site, and they alerted authorities to something near a set of wooden boards. The boards were sent to a crime lab for analysis, but unfortunately, no evidence was recovered. On May 5th, 1999, the Mason City Police officially ruled Tony Jackson out as a suspect in Jodi's case. Despite this, Jodi's family still believes there's a chance he was involved. Every time he's been approached for an interview or asked about Jodi, he adamantly denies any involvement. Years went by with no major developments in Jodi's case. Then on May 14th, 2001, 6 years after she disappeared, Jodi's family made the heartbreaking decision to have her legally declared dead. They didn't necessarily believe she was gone, but they needed to do this for legal reasons, to settle her estate. It's a difficult decision that many families of missing persons are forced to make. Sadly, one of the concerns in cases like this is that once a person is legally declared deceased, interest in the case often fades, and fewer people continue looking for answers. And now, 20 plus years later, we still don't know what happened to Jodi Huisentruit. Jodi's friends and families have never given up. In recent years, they reignited interest in her case. In 2021, her story was featured on 48 Hours. They have since launched a movement called Find Jodi. They are pushing for her case to stay in the public eye. Interestingly, they have been emphasizing just calling her Jodi rather than her full name. Part of this is because her last name is difficult to pronounce, but also because Jodi was well known in her community. One of the weirdest things that happened in this case occurred in June 2008. A local news station received a mysterious package containing 84 pages of Jodi's personal journal. No one knows who sent it or why. There was no return address, and the package was postmarked from Waterloo, Iowa. And get this, Jodi's actual journal had been in the possession of law enforcement since the beginning of the investigation. So this raised some serious questions. 1, how did someone get their hands on these copies? And 2, did someone within the police department leak it? Or, more disturbingly, could someone in law enforcement be involved in her disappearance? We don't know. But of course, we also have to address the serious mistakes in the investigation. A lot of poor police work was done in this case. One of the biggest mistakes, something that is truly shocking, is that the police never taped off the crime scene. The area where Jodi's car was found, the spot where she was most likely abducted, was left open, meaning anyone could have tampered with evidence, footprints, drag marks, fingerprints, anything could have been disturbed. In addition to that, police only held on to Jodi's car for a few months before returning it to her family. Her car was the crime scene, and they gave it back to her family far too soon. If they had kept it, modern forensic technology may have been able to uncover new evidence. In March of 2017, it was revealed that John Van Cise is still on police radar. Authorities served a search warrant for GPS data on 2 of his cars, but they have never disclosed what they found. Investigators said they cannot share details about the case because they don't want to compromise the investigation. This means that there could still be more to come. This case may still be solved. If you know anything, police are still looking for information. I'll leave all relevant links and contact details in the description box in case you have anything that could help. At the end of the day, it's important to remember that missing people aren't just stories. They were real people with real families. Jodi's family has never stopped grieving. Every birthday, every holiday, they have lived with the pain of losing her for nearly 3 decades. There is a possibility that someone out there has the answers. Someone who could help bring your family the closure that they deserve. If you have any information, please come forward. With that, we'd like to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Give us a thumbs up if you like our video. Hit that subscribe button down below. Hit the bell notification button to be notified of future videos. And of course, if you want to support the channel, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS. All the money you give goes right back into this channel so we can upgrade our equipment, bring in new hosts and pay them, and eventually one day take this show on the road. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. We will see you next time.